Okay, if you've been following us for any amount of time, you know that we do things a little bit differently. We're not just brokering machines. We're not just selling machines from a brochure. Oftentimes, the used CNC routers that we're offering, they are in our shop, and we're going to bring them back to life. Sometimes they're very dirty. They're covered in dust. Not only are we going to clean these machines thoroughly and grease them, but we're also going to go through every part in every function of the machine, and if anything isn't working or it's broken, we're going to replace it with brand new factory parts. In this video, we'll also answer questions like, what's this Zerk fitting doing on top of my electric motor? So we're going to go through this whole machine front to back, and you're going to get to see what we do to our machines to bring them back to looking like new, as you see in some of these photos. Some of the tools we're using, like dial indicators and the granite stones for aligning gantries and tramming spindles. And here are some shots of before and after. So this is before the cleaning. A typical machine that comes in, it's going to have years of dust, debris, and grease all caked up in various spots along the different axes. And while some of these machines are still working, they don't look good. And here, not only are we replacing a lot of the bearings and parts, but we're also going to clean them down. And here, it looks just as well as it did when it came out of the factory on day one. So I hope this video helps. You can also use this video as a how-to on some of the basic maintenance for these machines and see exactly what we do when we bring a machine into our facility before it leaves. Okay, today we're taking a look at the MultiCam TurboVac 10 horsepower positive displacement pump. Now, one of the things that gets neglected on these is the maintenance. This pump has an oil reservoir and it does need to be changed. Now, the book says to change it quarterly, but I'd venture to say most people don't even change it yearly, if ever. So we're going to show you how to do that, some tips on making it easier for you, and basically do a quick walkthrough. So here we have the breather cap. We're going to take that off. Here you have a little window. This is our overflow reservoir, so we're going to fill up to this reservoir until it starts to overflow. Now there is a window on here, but it's very difficult to see and to get behind here and actually look. So we're going to visually inspect that with this off, make sure the oil is starting to pour out. That tells us it's full. And then down here, of course, we've got our drain plug. So we're going to start with the breather cap. We're going to take that off. That's a 17 millimeter connection, and we'll just take that off right now. Now I'm being careful to wipe the dust away from this port. We don't want anything to drop in there. So that is now off, and the breather cap is off. We'll set that aside. Next, we're going to take off the overflow bolt, and that is a 19 millimeter. This is one of those tight spaces where it would be handy if you had a ratcheting 19 millimeter wrench. And eventually you get to where you can do it by hand. Now that's coming out pretty fast, which means that's got plenty of oil in it, and it may even be more oil than necessary, or more than the book would tell you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to put this funnel underneath and see if I can't get some of that oil to drain out for me. Put this funnel right here, and then take that cap back off again. I've just got a drip pan here. If I hold that like that, you can see the oil is now pouring out of the hose here. And I can watch the volume here. I could leave those plugged if I wanted to, and we could see just how much, but I can tell it's already slowing down. So the oil doesn't look that bad. But definitely I can tell it was overfilled based on how much oil is coming out of that overflow plug. So when we refill through the top, we're going to leave this open and fill it until that hole starts to overflow, and then we can cap it. So it should be right at that level. What I'll do is I'll cap that back for now, and then I will wipe up some of that oil. We don't want to create a big mess. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unplug the drain valve, and that is a 11mm wrench. Now what some people will do, which makes a lot of sense, is they'll put a quick release drain valve here. So a little valve with a tube, and then that way you can leave that connected, close it obviously when you're not changing your oil, but that'll make it really quick and simple. We would just take that hose, put it out here. You can leave the hose connected and put it back inside when you're not using it. But that'll make your oil changes a lot easier, which means you're more likely to do them more frequently or on schedule. Okay, I've gotten to where I can do it with my hand now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo both the drain valve and the overflow valve and try to use the funnel for both. That is a messy, messy job. Another reason you'd want to get that drain valve going is just to avoid the mess. As you can see, I've got oil down here I'm going to have to wipe up. I've got oil over my hands. And so it's just a messier deal to do it that way. Now I'm not even really getting this, so I'm actually, there we go. If you get that funnel way up under there, you can start to get it to make its way into the pan here. Okay, so once we've got most of the oil drained, we're going to replace the 11mm drain plug in the bottom. We're going to leave both the breather cap and the overflow open. We're going to pour the oil in the funnel, new oil, through there, and again, leaving the overflow open until we see oil start to come out of there. Then we'll plug that one up too, and that'll mean we've got the right amount of oil in the system, and our oil change will be complete. So at this point, I've just got a real light stream coming down from the oil. Majority of the oil is out of there. I'll go ahead and cap that now. It's always a great idea to make sure you use the right kind of lubricant, oil, grease, when you're doing these kind of maintenance operations. I happen to have a big tub of oil labeled MultiCam TurboVac oil, but you can definitely get the exact specifications either from MultiCam or from Republic, and if I can pull those up for you, I'll put those in the description below. Okay, real quickly, I checked my shelf. I've got some 5-star Super Lube 220 from Republic. This is likely what you'd use on a TurboVac pump, but double check with your manual and the manufacturer to make sure you use the correct lubricant. Now I'm going to take my 11mm wrench, and we're going to tighten up the plug, the drain plug down here. Again, I wish I had my ratcheting metric wrench set with me today. That should do it. Make sure I've got a good funnel, it's a good size, and I'll grab the oil. Okay, I've got my oil. No, it's not a Starbucks. I have the oil in a big, large drum, so I'm going to pour it in this first to make it a little easier to get it into the funnel without spilling it all over the place. So that's the idea. So I'm going to have my overflow cap ready with that little window. And like I said, we should start to pour this in. Let me clean that funnel out a little bit. This funnel's been sitting around in the shop for a while. There we go. And we can pour some of that oil in. And I'm just watching my overflow cap. And there There it goes. Didn't take a whole lot of oil. So a bottle, small bottle should last you a while. But there we go. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up with my 19-inch wrench. And last, I will put the breather cap back on. And that is the 17mm wrench. Okay, of course we're going to test run this, check for any leaks, but that should be all that's required for your oil change. So again, you can add that quick valve here, which would allow you to remove the oil quickly, let it drain out for a while, and it'll be a lot cleaner if you have a valve on here with a hose that hangs out. Put it right into a drip pan, and the book calls for this quarterly, so it's worth doing if you can get one of those valves. And yeah, so that's it for the oil change. On to the next thing. The next thing we're going to look at is the vacuum controller. This is what it looks like. This is the original one, and as you can see, it's falling apart. Very dusty and dirty, and the top portion of it was literally falling apart. It's got broken plastic pieces. So it just wasn't worth rebuilding or replacing the filters and doing a thorough cleaning. So in the rare case where you've got to replace it completely, parts still are readily available. Here it is, brand new. I've got the Teflon tape on it. It's got the filter, which was completely missing. This is the bottom filter, and then there's also the top filter. That's this piece right here as well. So they do sell kits where you can rebuild these. You can buy the filters and some various other parts. So there's a good chance what you've got now is either serviceable or you can replace a few parts. But if you do have to do the whole assembly, it is here. Now, there's great instructions in the back for operation and maintenance, for adjusting the vacuum, and also cleaning. And you do want to clean this thing as it's described on the unit itself or in the manual. So this is probably one of those items that's a little bit more forgotten than most. And so you do want to take care to perform that maintenance and service to get the longest life out of your pump and to get the best performance out of your pump. One of the most common questions we get from people is, my vacuum pump's not holding down parts. What's going on? Is it a leak in my table? Is it bad material? Sometimes it's improper or lack of maintenance on the vacuum itself. So we want to do everything we can to get the optimum performance out of our vacuum, and that's why we also installed a new gauge so we can monitor that as well once all this is done. And then this just threads on. You want to go hand tight, again with a little bit of Teflon tape in there. And then we're just going to put that on hand tight. We're not going to use a wrench. So just follow the instructions, and we're putting on the new vacuum controller. One quick note, looking at the opposite side of the vacuum system, if we come down here, the Roots Lobe style blower, this unit here, has a blue label on the back. It's got the model and serial number of the rotary lobe system itself, and the model name's right here. These last three digits, DSL. If yours has a DSL, that stands for dual splash lubricant, and that means it's got two different chambers, one on this side and then one on the other side. So you see the sight glass here, the breather cap here, and the drain valve down here. So we will do that on both sides. We already did it on the opposite side. We won't record this one because it's the same process, but just make a note that you do want to have that done twice, so you will be changing the oil on both sides, as those are separate chambers. Just wanted to clarify that for anybody out there that's wondering. Okay, here's the overflow, and if you can see right here, it's about 3/4, almost halfway up. You can see it's right there, just about halfway, a little bit more than halfway. You want it halfway through that window. That's where you want the oil level to be when you fill it up through the breather cap opening. And you just watch for this. I use a light and it helps. And then as soon as that's about halfway up, that's the right amount. Then tighten that down, tighten your breather cap, and then make sure your drain plug is tight as well. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is replace the filter box and filter that comes on the top of this system. Now, most of the time, you only need to replace the very top. The top also has a plug, so you'll want to replace that as well. So that'll be two parts, the top and the plug. The top part number you can see is right here, stamped here, and then the plug that matches that. The problem with these original designs is they used big plastic clips. And so when you would put that on, you press on the clip, pull it off, and over time, those plastic pieces get worn and then they break off. You can see both sides are gone here, which doesn't hold this cap on very well. So you can order a new one. Now I just got this one in today and notice they've changed the design. So now they have a metal clip that's a lot more forgiving as far as moving things on and off, and probably last you a lot longer. Now I did check. Here's the original system here. This cover does fit the original. So again, if this is fine and there's nothing wrong with this, you can keep this plastic piece in place and just order the cover. We happened to get the whole system in ours as a kit. It came with the plug, the cap, the base, and a new filter. And so all I had to do was undo this one clamp, and this pops and slides right in here. So that's pretty easy. And then I'll just take the hardware, the U-pipe here, the clamp, and this pipe as well, take that off and put those back onto the new system. And so this will be replaced, and this is going to be our new system here. This is the old filter as well. If your filter's just dirty, you can clean it out, but it's been years and years with this filter, and so just wanted to do a new setup, so we're doing a new filter here, and that cap's going to slide on nicely, and then those will clamp into place just like that, and then the bottom one as well. And so that's the next part of putting this back together and doing our long overdue maintenance for this pump. So we're going to get those other hardware pieces on, and then this thing's going to be ready to go. We're going to have the new cap, the new cover, the new filter, the new base, plug those back in. Oh, and the last thing is we've got a new gasket, because that gasket was missing. Now this gasket goes from the inside of our pipe here to the vacuum pump over there. So it's just a small little gasket that fits right into those grooves. So that was missing. Not uncommon for that to get lost, but we're going to go ahead and replace that as well. And so that's it for this setup. Okay, here's the part number on that gasket. And now we're going to simply do a quick walkthrough of how we put this back in. So this piece is going to be the same for the 10 horsepower and the 20 horsepower units. It's going to go right between these two pipes here. And that's just going to help keep that vacuum seal together. So put it in there, make sure it's secure, and then go ahead and put this clamp back on. You might need to open it up a little bit to get it back in there. And then once you slide that clamp in place and it locks in, then you can tighten it up. And just tighten it enough to get that to seal up. Okay, with the cover back over the pump and all the new hardware installed, it's time to put this back together for its final assembly. And again, we've got this nice new filter here. We're just going to gently slide that on. And when you get to the end, you give it another little push. It'll go about a 1/2 inch more together. It's a nice snug fit. And then notice that the cap does say the top right here. So make sure that's facing the top. And go ahead and slide that cover securely in place. And then again, this new style has the metal clips instead of the two plastic clips. and you can clip that back on, and that is now secure. One of the things about these pumps is that it has a large cooling fan that is always on. Anytime that power is connected to this machine, it'll be running, regardless if the pump is on or off. So when I got this pump and the fan wasn't on, I knew there was a problem. So we checked the fuses. There was a couple of blown fuses, and what I think happened is that the fan had burnt out, then it burnt out the fuses that were powering the fan. And so we replaced the fuses, ordered a brand new fan from the manufacturer, and we're back up and running. Okay, next thing we're gonna do, because it's probably never been done, is we're going to grease this electric motor. We're using the Mobile Polyrex EM grease. This is blue in color, and it's designed specifically for the bearings of electric motors. Most people might not even notice there's a Zerk fitting on their electric motor, but most electric motors require greasing at some point. The intervals are usually thousands and thousands of hours apart, so we're talking about years between greasing, and the amount of grease and the interval will be determined by the severity of the use and the manufacturer's recommendations for that specific motor. So check your manufacturer and your motor for those specs, but this is just one of those other things that we don't want to overlook. I really like these Dualco short nozzle pump action grease guns. I'll leave a description below where you can pick one up. Okay, this is an extreme example, but we've done a lot to this pump because this pump needed a lot. We found out that some fuses had blown because the fan had gone bad and caused the fuses to blow, so we replaced those fuses. And then obviously the fan itself, just had to wire that in. The vacuum controller up top and all those filters. We replaced the vacuum gauge down there in the bottom so we can keep track of how much vacuum we've got. We've greased the motor. We did not change the belt, but we did change the oil on both sides because this is a dual splash reservoir on this particular pump. And then general cleaning, and there's that Zerk fitting, a close-up of that Zerk fitting for the grease. And yeah, that was a complete overhaul on this pump. We also replaced the gasket up top and all the housing for that main filter, as well as the cap and cover for this particular pump. So with everything like that replaced, all new filters, new vacuum controller, new vacuum gauge, fresh grease, fresh oil, this pump's ready to rock. So oftentimes we'll make this repair on these machines. Is you see here the touch off. We can mill that down and actually put the new thickness in the parameters so we get an accurate touch off. And then we also need a grounding wire. And originally these were tool clips, but now we can use a magnet. So we'll just use a rare earth magnet that has a countersink hole. We'll put the screw in there along with a lock washer and a nut. And now we don't have to worry about that falling off. In fact, this little magnet is how MultiCam does their new machines. Originally they used the tool clips, but now they use magnets. So we're just bringing this back to the current factory spec. You can get yourself some rare earth magnets with a hole in them, a little countersink, use a screw and a nut, and do this yourself. Again, we're just showing you what we do on all the machines that come into our showroom before we put them on the website and make them available for sale. Now, every CNC router that we bring into our facility, we're going to test run. Here you see us running a table mill operation. This will test various items like the tool changer, the touch off. We're getting motion in X, Y, and Z. We're going to listen to that spindle. We're going to do a tool change. This is also going to skim off that top layer of the board and give us some better vacuum hold down. It's going to level out that board, and we're going to see exactly how this machine is running. And once we've done the first few passes of a table mill, we can see just how smooth that surface is. And if there's any steps in that, that means the spindle is misaligned, and we can fix that with the tools we have here in the shop, ensuring that every machine that goes out has a perfectly trammed spindle and creates a smooth spoil board for the next user. Okay, in this video, we're going to go through the bearing cars today. In fact, we're going to replace the original bearing cars on this 2005 MultiCam with new ones. And we're going to go through that now. First thing is to take off the cover. Now with the cover off, I've got access to the 4 mounting bolts inside. Okay, with the 4 bolts that mount to the bearing block removed, we're ready to take this bearing block out. Now, a couple of things. Have a rag handy, as we can clean some of this out of here and make sure we've got no debris. I also may save these running blocks for future if I need an emergency one. Again, these aren't bad. We didn't have a problem with the machine, but they are original, and we wanted to just outfit this machine with brand new bearings. So we're going to go ahead and save this. So in order to do that, I'm going to grab a plastic piece of rail. Now these will come with any new bearing cards that you buy, and you can slide that right onto here. They recommend never having those empty without a rail inside. So we're just going to slide that right onto here, and let's see if we can get this bearing block to move at all. A little bit of force, I'm just pressing on the back of that bearing block, just a little bit to get it to start to move. And as you can see, that's coming out. And I'm going to push that a little bit more. I want to be careful not to push too hard. Once it gets free of the gantry, I don't want it to slide off onto the floor. There's lots of grease on there. There we go. That's why I said to have a rag ready, because this thing's got grease all around it, mixed with a lot of sawdust. This thing's ready to come off, so again, we're going to put this right in front, and that's just going to slide right onto that. And that first bearing block is off. Now I do notice that the Zerk fitting, the grease fitting on this bearing block is a little bit of an extended one. So I may want to reuse this on my replacement ones, because the new ones generally come with just a shorty. Although I can probably fit a grease needle into the shorty the way it sits here looking at it. So I don't necessarily need that extra long one. But if you do want to reuse that, you can. I would recommend trying to clean this out first, just in case there's sawdust or any debris in there. You don't want to flush that into your brand new bearing car. So looking at this, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. It doesn't look to be in too bad a shape, especially considering this is the original bearing block car. Some of these wipers may be a little rough, but overall this is a good working bearing. And if I needed this as an emergency, if I had a machine that went down due to a bad bearing car, or somehow we had a damaged one, I'd have no problem using this one in the future. But we're going to put 4 brand new ones on, and we're going to get hopefully some even quieter and smoother motion in this machine with new bearing cars, new grease, and we'll go from there. Okay, here's a shot. We've cleaned the entire area, slid on the new bearing with that Zerk fitting attached. And now you can see what that looks like here. Very clean. Here's an inside look. Those are the 4 mounting bolts that go into that bearing car that hold that in place. And so this is just a quick look after the installation of that first brand new replacement bearing car. And here's a quick look at what a brand new bearing car looks like before it's installed. Okay, now we've moved the machine to the rear so we can install the rear bearing car on this side. And sometimes you might notice it's a little hard to get the old one out or the new one in. And if that's the case, you might have to apply a little bit of pressure. So we'll grab a large flathead screwdriver here, and we can apply a little bit of pressure on this gantry support, which will allow us enough wiggle room to get that new bearing car in or out. Once we're able to slide it in a little further, then we can line up the mounting bolts so that those can go and thread in nicely into the correct spots. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to apply pressure on the top and bottom with my thumbs, and I'm going to slide that in the rest of the way so we can line it up to get the bolts in. Okay, once we've got the bearing car in place, we simply install the 4 Allen bolts through the upright into the back of the bearing car and snug them up nice and tight. They should get started and go in very easily. Now we're doing the third one, and on this opposite side, sometimes those mounting bolts are also shared with the bracket that's being held in place here that the cover is used to attach to. So you notice my bracket is now loose, and that's okay. If you don't have to remove all of the bracket bolts, you can leave the bracket in place and simply take out the bolts you need to get the bearing car out. Okay, I started to get a little smarter. Now I'm using a glove, as these bearing replacement jobs can get a little bit messy. But you'll start to get the hang of it as you do 1, 2, 3, and so on, and they'll become a little bit easier. Sometimes I got to use a little bit of pressure on the back to push that through, but eventually it'll pop out, and then I can slide it off the rail. Again, if you're going to reuse them, or if you want to save them, then you want to put that plastic piece inside. If they're damaged or you're not going to be worrying about reusing them, then you can just slide them off and dispose of them as you wish. This one might be a little bit cracked or damaged, which is why I didn't put the plastic retainer inside. Okay, so make sure you line this up correctly. Make sure the Zerk fitting that you're going to use is facing in the accessible direction. And now I'm applying a little bit of lightweight machine oil to the faces of not only the bearing block, but also the rail profile and the face of the rail. And what we want to do is help initiate that installation where we're going to slide this on. We don't want any scratching, any marring, so they recommend a little bit of oil will help get that on and make that a smooth transition as we put this new bearing car onto the rail for the first time. And as you're installing this, we're not going to need a lot of excessive force. So if it's not going on smoothly, chances are you just don't have it lined up perfectly. Just take your time, make sure you've added a little bit of oil, and it should go on nice and smooth. And then once it's seated, you should be able to move that back and forth and feel no real resistance in that brand new bearing. After checking for nice smooth movement, I noticed right away that there was a problem. It would not allow me to slide that bearing car behind this gantry upright. Just like we experienced on the other side, I'm going to need to apply a little bit of pressure to push that gantry support out of the way so we can slide that bearing car in. Okay, the last thing we're going to do here is remove the motor. It's got two cables, one for power and one is the encoder cable. And we're going to remove the motor so we can get access to the pinion gear, or what MultiCam calls the spur gear. So on many machines that are rack and pinion like this one is, you will get some wear over time, especially on a machine that's over 15 years old like this one. And if we're lucky, they'll use a slightly softer alloy in that pinion gear than they do in the rack. That way, the most likely part to wear first would be that pinion gear, and that's the easiest to remove and replace and the least expensive. If you do have to replace a whole rack, it could be 10 feet or 12 feet long on the machine on both sides, and that can get expensive to purchase and time-consuming to install. So in this case, we just have to replace that spur gear. That's what's showing the most wear. We'll put two new ones in, and we'll get much smoother and tighter tolerances and motion. Each machine's going to be different. Some machines are easier than others. On this particular model, once we release the cables for the motor, it's simply 4 Allen bolts to remove, and this motor will simply drop right out. Once we get that last bolt out, we'll simply remove the motor, exposing that pinion gear on the other side. And we'll take this motor over to the top of the table here, where we can get a better view of it. Once in a while, you might get lucky and you can remove that pinion gear by hand, but in most cases, you're going to need a gear puller like we have here. I will leave a link in the video description below where you can pick one up. But once you've got that on there and you removed the split collar on the back of the shaft there, then you can start to use the gear puller and simply turn that screw while it's pulling that gear off of the motor shaft. Once you get it going, it should come off, and now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and grab a rag and pull it the rest of the way, and it'll pop right off. There we go. And so what I'll do is I'll clean that shaft and make sure there's no debris or anything left behind. And then we'll go ahead and slide the new gear on. And as you can see, I'm able to put the new one on by hand. I'm just applying equal pressure on both sides as I push that onto the shaft. And we're just going to seat that at the same position the original one was. Okay, now we're going to put that shaft clamp back on. That's the two-piece split clamp that we removed earlier, but we didn't catch it in a shot. So here it is going back on. That just helps secure that pinion gear to the shaft with a couple of Allen bolts. Okay, with that clamp tightened up, it's now time to reinstall the motor. Same way we took it off, we will mount it back up there with the 4 bolts and plug in those 2 cables. Okay, we're going to move the cables out of the way and we're going to slide this motor into place. And then once we get these 4 bolts started, then that will hold the motor in place. And then there is one bolt that has kind of a swinging approach. So it gets a couple of bolts in there to mount it, and then you swing it in place, and we're just gently pushing straight up into the rack. And the biggest thing is to just keep in mind to keep that straight. And we don't have to put too much pressure on that, but we're making sure that we've got a complete engagement of that pinion gear into the rack, and then we can snug up those bolts and reattach our cables. Now, one last thing to note, this is considered the XB side, so this is the XB motor. And working on the XA side, which is the opposite side of the gantry, that's going to be identical as far as removing the motor and replacing that gear. With all that done, we're going to power up. You can see the keypad is lighting up and the internal controller is booting up. And we are going to test the machine movement and see how everything looks and sounds. Now, if everything goes according to plan, as this boots up, there will be no error messages. And it'll go to the XYZ screen, like you see here. And then we simply initialize spindle, and the machine will start homing. First, the Z will move up and touch off the limit switch. It'll ask us to make sure there's no tool in the spindle, and then it will begin moving in X and Y off those limit switches. Once it gets to the X position at the front of the table, it'll align itself off both switches. If it does this in a couple of seconds or less, we are good to go. And now we can run a warm-up. It'll go grab a tool and start the spindle. And there you have it. We are now spinning at 6,000 RPM with a nice quiet spindle. Well, that's going to do it for this video as we take a couple last looks with the covers back on, all those new bearing cars greased up, ready to go. This was just a quick glimpse in how we treat some of the machines that come into our showroom. I hope you can appreciate what we do, as we always want to give the best possible machine we can to our customers. And if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like button, consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.